And this question is going to be, I'm going to start off with Dr. Gway on this question, because I want each panelist to be able to answer this question specifically. And I want to just kind of remind everybody, I'm not trying to place any restrictions on time, but I just want to be able to give everybody an opportunity to speak so that we can get through the whole program here. So let's try to limit our responses to 30 to 45 seconds if we can. If you do go a little bit over, that's fine, but let's just have a little bit of courtesy for everybody here that's wanting to speak. So this next question is, I want to start off with you, Dr. Wade, because you deal with this at the front lines when you are at the high school level. Do you think that Black leadership should take a position on the musical genre, gangster rap, hip hop, all of these, rappers and artists that seem to be promoting, violence, Black on Black crime, different criminal aspects, and specifically for me, what I think is of most interest is glorifying drug culture, glorifying drug use and addiction in these hip hop songs. Because speaking from somebody who has dealt with individuals very, very close to me that have suffered tragedies from this, do you think that this has a direct impact on our youth at the high school level by them listening to it, as well as do you think that it should be addressed by Black leadership as something that should be condoned or promoted?
I know my brother Coach D is salivating on this one because we talk about this all the time. Man, we're gonna have to talk offline. But real quick, first off, Josh, all due respect, the narrative of Black on Black crime, I want that to be something that is dismantled, because it continues to perpetuate the legacy to put Black people dirty laundry out in the open. And you guys in the law criminal justice field, you guys know, white on white crime happen all the time. Latinx crime against Latinx crime happen all the time. But you never hear that narrative. You constantly hear Black on Black crime. So I have a huge problem with that. With that said, as far as the hip hop genre, I grew up in it. Black leaders have before jumped into what they call gangster rap in the early 90s, I would say late 80s, when gangster rap was becoming a thing, right? And they try to squash the voice of the youth. If you know the history of rap and hip hop, it came out of the rebellious nature of young people who were the children of men and women that walked and marched and protested in the civil rights movement. So when we're talking about the late 70s, early 80s, these young people like, I'm not going out there marching and getting bit by my parents and getting hosed down. I'm not doing that no more. But I'm going to use this art form to speak what we see in our neighborhood. So that's what the culture came out of. Now, with the time, when you look at the history of the 80s and the early 90s, when the drug epidemic hit and so forth in these communities, they started to talk about what they were seeing. So every child, and the way I speak to them now, every child, every person have a decision to make, what they listen to, what come out of their mouth, and what actions they take in making that thing happen. You have white children who will listen to heavy metal and go shoot up a school. So as far as Black leaders taking a mantle into, confronting that, I don't think that's a Black leadership thing. I think that's a parent thing. That's something that parents need to be involved in, know what their children are listening to, and have those rules and things set in, and being able to have conversations with them as far as what they're listening to. Listen to some of the things they listen to, and kind of make the decision on, is that something that is a moral and value within your home? I think that's where the answer lies in dealing with that situation.
And just to respond to that, to be more specific for everyone else that wants to answer, I am a huge hip hop head, so I know, I'm very aware of the history that comes along with hip hop emerging in the late 80s, going into the early 90s. The specific, I should have been a little bit more specific. The real question is I'm not specifically addressing people like Tupac, Nas, NWA, because when you listen to those lyrics, as you stated, they're talking about what they're seeing in their own communities, and they're being more taking an activist role when they're speaking in the music. And I like that kind of, But what the music that I don't like is listening to artists today who are talking about popping perks, taking Xanax, drinking. Oh, I have 3 girlfriends. That's more of what I'm talking about, is the emergence of how hip hop has evolved, and
Yeah,
now how most children in today's society at the high school level are not
yeah,
necessarily listening to music from the late 80s and early 90s like
right.
myself, old school hip hop, but more of the new stuff that's coming out that's causing what I believe to be uh, more drug use and more drug overdoses in children, because if they think that it's okay to do these types of drugs, then they're
Absolutely.
going to do them.
No, no, I mean, great point. And I absolutely, and again, for me, my perspective, I think that's the responsibility of parents. I firmly believe, even as educators working in the school, these young people are listening to, but not all of them are going out and popping pills and doing drugs, but they're still listening to the same music. So it becomes an individual decision that they have to make. So those morals and those values and those standards have to be set in the home. So you can listen to those things, but it's not going to determine what actions you're going to put forth.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to jump in right here and take a few questions from the participants. One is a comment and directed at Anthony Lewis, and I think the question is directed to him as well. So Ngozi says, let me quickly read that. It says, what the real issue is, why do they not? I think this is referring to the math equation that you gave, Anthony Lewis. The real issue is, why do they not get the half plus one third? What is the underlying issue that caused them to have no background? Could that be the contributor to why they ended up in jail? That's number one. That's the question. And the comment is regarding how you act at maybe police stops. It says, not all individuals, that's from King's Court. Not all individuals are in your position. Many individuals in poor neighborhoods are pulled over for no reason at all. Pretextual stops, I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Yes.
Pretextual stops are common in Black and underprivileged neighborhoods. Anthony Lewis, how do you respond to this question and the comments?
Okay, let me start with the first part. I think the question concerned fractions. I gave you the example of 1/2 plus 1/3 equals 1/5. And of course, I always like to save this little part for Dr. Guay. Sometimes when I go there and I ask them 1/2 plus 1/3, they look and look and look and look and look, and I say, okay, just read it to me. And this is what they read to me. You're going to have to write this down and make it make sense. They say N1 minus plus W1 minus 11. Do you get that? You got to write it down. They take the fraction and they turn it on its side and they read it like hieroglyphics. I think that's a problem. That's only happened one time. That's happened more than 4 or 5 times. A grown man, I don't deal with too many children, an adult, some of whom have a GED or a high school diploma, took a 4th grade fraction, turned it on its side, and read it like Chinese hieroglyphics. Now, that person is going to make a number of complaints to the state bar because he doesn't like how I'm talking to him, and I have a bad bedside manner. His judgment is terrible. His judgment is, how can you build judgment or logic when you don't even recognize the math fraction as a math fraction? The issue, that's 4th grade. Typically, people don't start getting tracked and don't start losing interest in education until they hit 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. That's my understanding of education. So between kindergarten and 4th grade, they're sort of tracking. Somewhere around 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, they sort of get off a track. But there are too many resources online. There are too many, you can't go with the 30-year ago argument, the schools suck. You can have the worst teacher at the front of the class because you're walking around with your personal tutor in your pocket. You don't have to worry about the teacher at the front of the class because you have your own tutor in your pocket on the issue of education. Let me go to the pretextual stop. A pretextual stop, basically, for bowling, for other folks that don't know, that's where the officers see your vehicle at a certain time of day or night, and they say they pull you over because it's a high crime area. Here's the most important thing you need to know about pretextual stops. The law says that they're legal. So you don't have to like it. There's a lot of things you might not like. The law says if my wife gets a TPO against me, I can't contact her. She can call me 50 times. And if I call her back one time, I'm going to get in trouble. You may not like that about the law, but that's what the law is. The law says I can't contact her. If she comes to my church, I got to get out of there. If she comes to the courthouse, I probably don't have to leave the courtroom. But other than that, I got to get out of there. I can't have contact with her. The issue of fairness, that's something else. Whether that's fair that she can contact me 50 times and I can't contact her one time, that's a separate issue. Are police going to pull over black men who drive a car that's too nice or too shiny or too raggedy? Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I don't want them to do when they pull the car over is search the car because they smell marijuana. I want your license, your insurance, and your registration to be in order. There's no odor of marijuana, so they have no reason to pull you out the car. Listen, in the end, there may be no way to stop any of this. But as I start going through all of the young men that's killed, what do they have in common? They're all black. That's true. They're all black. They all have some difficulty following instructions. I don't have any difficulty following instruction. It's a stupid instruction. The officer's giving it. And they all have some kind of substance in their system. I don't want you to be high on no alcohol, marijuana. I want you to be clear-headed when you're dealing with the officer. Well, so what's that mean? How do I know when I'm gonna deal with the officer? Be clear-headed all the time. Oh my God, I can't drink. Yes, be clear-headed all the time. If you start to go through the last 10 years of who was clear-headed, you're gonna see that number. What, how many people? 60%, 70%? I'm following the cases too. Guyton shot the dude in Texas. He was in his house. He didn't have any drugs in his system. The young man that got shot, I think in Ohio, that went to buy some s'mores, he didn't have any drugs in his system. But I'm keeping up with who has drugs in their system. And when you have drugs in your system, do you feel like you need to follow authority? Do you have a problem with authority? I got two sons. The 18-and-a-half-year-old, he sort of doesn't want to listen. I got to deal with that. But I'm not putting him in a car. Because if he can't close the linen closet door and he can't fold up his clothes and put them in a drawer and close the drawer, he's not going to listen to the officer on the street. So if you can't listen to me, I'm not going to put you behind the wheel so you can have more drama. So parents got to start getting real too. You know your children. You know your children. Does your son listen to you? No. Then don't put him in a car. What do you put him in? Because I don't want to drive him. He's not ready. Huh? From the iGen. 15 minus 3, he's 12. 21 minus 3, he thinks like an 18-year-old. He's just not ready. Stop pretending he's ready, giving him a car, releasing him to the street, and then saying, okay, you deal with him, officer. No, I don't want you, the officer, to deal with him. I want you to keep raising him until he's ready to be a man.
Thank you so much. And that sort of reinforces what the next question I was going to ask. How I know we touched on this a little, but I would want one of the educators to maybe enlighten us some more. So education does play a role in the pipeline, or whether there's a pipeline or not, into the justice system. So it's looking like, or it's sounding like, the more educated and clear-headed we are, the less we get into that pipeline. Am I right or wrong, Dr.
I would say true.
Okay.
I would say false.
Excuse me, Professor Rafi?
I said I would say false, but the beauty of a panel is you have people with very different ideas.
Okay, why don't you tell us why you think it's true and why you think it's false?
I think he explained why he thinks it's true in the last answer, right?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, Professor Rafi, tell us why you think it's false.
So look, I would just say this. I think that again, there are, in any profession, there are folks who disagree about how you carry out that profession. I think Mr. Lewis and I have a different vision of the role of the defense lawyer. Some of this may be that he's a private practitioner, and so folks select him. As a public defender, we don't select the people that come to us. And I think that comes with an added obligation to understand that so many people come into the system after every institution in life has failed them, right? If you look in Atlanta alone, the worst schools, it's no coincidence that they're correlated to student body being predominantly Black and brown. You look at the worst housing stock, it is correlated to the people that live there being Black and brown, right? In every factor, economics, there is a correlation. And so by the time people get to the criminal justice system, I think there are some people that say that's just that you weren't responsible. I think that lets society off the hook. We can predict there are communities of children that are more likely to the criminal justice system than other communities because we know that they're going to be failed all along the way. My vision of a defense lawyer is not different from my vision of a doctor or a teacher. I believe that a good teacher has to truly respect their students. They have to meet their students where they are. They have to understand that sometimes they're not where they need to be. And rather than blame them, they have to work with them to help them deal with the situation at hand. Good doctors. If I had a doctor that didn't want to give me choice and respect and dignity, I'd hire someone else. I believe with a lawyer, we have an obligation to meet people who may not be as educated as their more privileged peers. They may have mental health issues. Maybe they have substance abuse challenges, but we have an obligation to treat them with dignity and respect, to make sure they understand the consequences that face them and the choices that they have, the evidence before them. Sometimes it takes a little longer to do that when people have had challenges in their life, but we have an obligation to make sure they understand and elevate that voice. And I would say I would recommend everyone read Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, which is a wonderful book that helps you understand how many people end up in this system. And once they get in the system, we show them no dignity at all. And so I think the greatest calling we have as defense lawyers is to make sure that in a system that doesn't want to humanize and dignify someone, we speak for them, lift up that voice, and challenge anyone who won't see them as a human being, as flawed as they may be. That's an awesome responsibility. I think those of us who are public defenders, where people don't choose us, don't want us, have never had someone give them a voice in life, have even a higher obligation to practice that way.
Thank you so much.
One thing?
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sort of in a very unique position sitting here in Gwinnett County because I'm on the court appointed list. So if I have 200 cases a year, 150 clients are appointed and 50 would be retained. So the bulk of my clients are appointed to me. Here's the difference between a retained and appointed client. A retained client is paying you to make the case go away without ever having to go to trial. He doesn't want to go to trial. He's paying you to resolve the case without going to trial. The typical appointed client never even asks my opinion. He's telling me, listen, I didn't do it and I'm going to trial. Okay, that's fine, you're going to trial. Even while I'm talking about trial, he's talking about how I want him to plead. Sir, nobody has said plead to you. Nobody's talking about a plea. We're getting ready for trial. And the Friday before trial, you know what I hear? Why didn't you give me a plea? Sir, why would I have gone to get you a plea? I did not negotiate for a sex change because I didn't plan on getting one. And I didn't go get a plea for a person that says that they're innocent. So what fundamentally I've learned in the last 20 years is there's two ways to be a defense attorney. You can either be a waiter or you can be a nutritionist. When the person who's sitting there with a 30 BMI says, I want a double fried steak, you either go in the back, you respect them, as Professor Rapping says, you respect them and go in the back and get them a double fried steak, or you look at their skin and their eyes and you say, no, I think you need a tuna salad. I'm gonna always go in the back and get the double fried steak. Whatever you as a grown adult think is best for you, that's what I'm gonna do. I know that that's not best for you, but you're not asking me. And I'm not here to coerce you into entering a plea, even though you're only looking at 5 years on the plea, and I know this judge is gonna give you 25 years if we lose.
Let me suggest a third option. If
Okay.
if there is an option of a double steak and fries or a salad, and the person says double steak and fries, and you know it's bad for them, instead of going and just getting them the double steak and fries, develop a relationship, have a conversation, help them understand why that double steak and fries is not good for them. So I think one of the problems, and I'm not talking about Mr. Lewis. I don't know Mr. Lewis, and I know Joshua has the utmost respect for Mr. Lewis, but there are many defense lawyers out there who do not invest the time on the front end developing that relationship. Because when you have a relationship, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a lawyer, when someone wants to do something that your professional opinion is not right for them, you don't just let them do it. You help them understand how they get to the right decision. That takes relationship development. It takes respect. That's the key to being a defense lawyer in my mind.
I agree with that. I agree.
Thank you. So I'm going to take another question and I'll turn it over to.
Give Coach D a chance. Give Coach D.
Coach D. Coach D,
Oh,
want to
okay,
jump in
Coach D,
here?
go ahead.
Coach D about the butts.
I appreciate that, guys. Great stuff. So a couple of things. One, and I'll try to be brief. I'll try to follow the guidelines. So I'm just waiting on Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, I'm just waiting on you to pretty much say everything that goes on with the judicial system that happens to Black people is Black people's fault. So that's one thing, right?
Nah.
I'm almost waiting on that.
No.
Secondly, what I hear you addressing the product, the not the problem, but the result of the problem. So a lot of things that you've spoken on are products of problem. The real issues are hardly ever addressed. You've spoken about your level of entitlement, not necessarily financial entitlement, but the knowledge, the information, your position, you having your kids around, being able to properly educate them. All these things are entitlements, right? We can't just be presumptive and think that everyone has those same opportunities to be able to be in those positions to do those things. So my thing is, I think I want to hear about, I really want to hear about the systemic oppression and racism that is highly ingrained in policing itself. Like we can't talk about the system and almost pointing the finger at the result of what people are doing and opposed to real problem with not really addressing what policing is, not really addressing the origin of where it even comes from. Policing, the concept of policing was strictly about slave catching. That's the concept of what policing is. And so here it is, 400 plus years later, we are still seeing these things happen today. So if we are understanding from a historical stance, we must realize and say, you know what, there's a problem systemically with what's going on from a policing and a judicial system. We must understand that particular perspective. So I don't really hear anything about the accountability that needs to be taken by the system. I know I've heard, not necessarily from you, but I've heard about reform, what needs to happen. So locking up a police officer is just one piece of it. We understand that reform is about the DA. We understand that reform is about the judge, the lawyer, the prosecutors. So a lot of the things that we are dealing with now, when I hear you say things like your chances of being killed by someone is probably going to be by a Black person, is higher by a Black person opposed to a police officer, that's entitlement. And that's also not addressing the real problem. We're talking about economic disparity. We talk about education disparity. You use the 1/2, you use the 1/3. There's an educational disparity that is intended, like it was systematically put in place. We can't talk about these things without talking about redlining. We can't talk about these things without talking about the New Deal. We can't talk about these things without talking about Jim Crow, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus the Board of Education. These things are real. So what is taking place from a historical place has present implications on what's going on now. So to Mr. Rapp's point, yes, there is a 3rd, 4th, and 5th option as well that we must, as community service, because I see lawyers as doctors, as judges, as educators, as community advocates, being people who are community servants. So we're doing a disservice if we're not, one, only educating them on what's really going on, but also having a true and genuine invested interest in their well-being. Honestly speaking, candidly speaking, it sounds like you're a part of an indoctrinated system and you're speaking the same rhetoric in the language of those who has no understanding of what we are really experiencing and the implications of the system. So I appreciate your candidness and I love it. I would also love to invite you to some of my panels and some of my events as well, because I like the authenticity of what you're saying. But I think there's a grave disconnect in what we're doing here and only speaking on one half or one part of the discussion as it relates to policing or judicial system. I'm only hearing one narrative from you. I'm not hearing anything in its totality. That's
Okay.
my view.
Now, Coach D, I see a lot of responses to your discourse on the chat. And if I were to read them out, we won't leave here today. But I want to quickly take one question before I turn it over to Josh. We'll still come back and take more questions. So please, guys, hold on. Abby Coker said, there are a number of Black people, particularly men, who are stalked by the cops. They are polite, they are courteous, and follow all the rules and instructions, but they still get arrested or shot by the cops. What are your thoughts on this?
Who's that question for?
Well, you or Professor Rapping, the two of you that are lawyers, I think.
Let me start here, and I probably can tie in the answer with my response to that with actually what Coach D is saying. I don't believe that you can design a system that's going to meet everybody's needs. And when I talk about anything, I talk about, remember what Professor Rapping said earlier? I want to talk to people like I would talk to my children. I'm not talking to my children about how to fix the system. I'm talking to my children about how to survive the system. I'm talking to my children about how to navigate their way through the system. I'm not the marijuana guy. That's not who I am. I'm on the A-list here in Gwinnett. So what I try is the murders, the rapes, the armed robberies, the aggravated child molestations. I don't try the little possession with intent to distribute. They give that to somebody else. The forgeries, that George Floyd forgery, I don't see those cases. I get the monsters. So first thing we have to do is we have to separate the what they call the mass incarceration, incarcerating the Black men for drug crimes cases. That's not me. When I get a case, there's an actual victim. There's somebody dead, or there is somebody raped, or there's somebody shot in the face. So I got a real victim. So when we start talking about the officer putting handcuffs on people, we're not talking about them putting handcuffs on people for oxycodone or whatever, which might be legal. No. What I'm trying this year that's illegal, going to be illegal forever. Because it's never going to be okay for one person to kill another person. So most of what I handle, 80% of what's in my office right now, somebody called the police. A wife or a mother called the police on her son. You know why you call the police on your son? Because he out of control. He not listening to what you saying. He beating his sister in the face with a pistol. We got to deal with that. That's who I deal with. I don't deal with the cocaine guy. If he got one little bit of cocaine, they find it on the street, they put it on him. That's not who I got. I got people that do real crime. Nobody can disagree when the judge says, "Oh, I'm gonna give you 20 years," other than his family. Everybody else in the courtroom's clapping because the crime he charged with is horrific. So I'm not, what I'm talking about, not community. It can't be community service, because if somebody raped your daughter, I don't think you want to hear about community service, murder, somebody burn down the house, somebody shoot two of your children. I don't think anybody wants to hear in terms of what I try. I try to monster cases. I don't call them monster people. I try to monster cases. And rather than talk about what the evidence is, people come out instant, I didn't do it. Okay, so we're going to trial. Because I can't plead you to 15 years. It's so, than 50.
So
real quick, so are police officers, are those monster trials when they kill people? Are those monster trials? Because I would be of the mindset to believe that George Floyd was assassinated. I would be of the mindset that various people have been assassinated. So I would like to see those same guys get trial for murder and get convicted for murder, just as any other monster.
And you won't have any disagreement from me. You won't have any disagreement from me if you take.
But why doesn't it? You may not verbally disagree with me, but what I'm saying is systemically, it's not happening. And again, you spoke to
Again, I'm not the prosecutor. So I don't determine
what's your
who to
position.
start.
Let me ask you,
My-
what's your position in your particular role? What is your obligation? Although you're not the prosecutor, what is your obligation to get equal justice or to make sure these monsters are prosecuted? Although you're not the prosecutor, what is your obligation?
I don't assume any role in making another man do his job. I just do my job.
I'm asking.
Busy. I'm super busy doing my job. So what did Professor Rapping say? Take the time to get to know your client. Take the time to build the trust with your client so that your client doesn't make a poor decision to put his hand on that hot stove. I'm doing a lot of that. And you think, oh, you're Black, so you're talking to another Black dude, he just trusts you. No, that's not it. He says he wants a trial. We have to work through the evidence and we have to talk about the case. I don't have time to go. Nobody's telling me how to do my job. I can't go tell Paul Howard, listen, charge him and pursue the death penalty against him. I worked with Paul Howard for 16 months. Paul Howard's not going to listen to anybody. Paul Howard's going to do Paul Howard. I can't go down there and tell Paul Howard anything.
Okay, so we just concede that the judicial system is what it is. It'll continue to disenfranchise and illegally assassinate Black people and minorities and other people and white cops to get off.
The system, let me say this, the system moves at a certain pace. The system doesn't move like Google. Floyd is not going to die on Friday. He gets charged on Saturday. He gets convicted on Monday, and the next Friday he's in the
Officer Lewis, with all due respect, Officer Lewis. So real quick historical reference. 1619 Black slaves were brought here. All right. 1776, we're talking Declaration of Independence. 1787, we're talking the Constitution. 1865, we're talking free. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. Going to the 60s, civil rights, so on and so forth. So it moves at its own pace. But the same thing that was happening in 1619 is presently happening. So when does it change?
Sir, I suspect that the institutional issues that you discuss aren't going to change in our lifetimes. So now the question is,
let's let Rapping jump in here real quick.
So now the question is that you have a young man. How are you going to navigate that young man through? That's all I'm interested in. There's certain things I can't change. I would love for them to create something else for young boys so they wouldn't have to go to high school, especially since they're not interested in high school. Take them to the military between 14 and 18. And then when they actually grow up and their brain develop, then we can educate them because they're not really interested in school between 14 and 18. But I don't have that option. So I gotta work and cajole and
gentlemen, I have to cut in here. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I want to bring Professor Rapping in here, and I also want to throw in another question so he can tackle both together. I know one of you drew him in, so I'm also going to quickly add this for him to address, and then again I'll turn it over to Joshua and Albert. So Tina Smudge, I hope I said your name right, says kids with addictions can't always make the choice to not use the drugs. Also, the drugs affect their judgment. Then they get in trouble and get punished. It's not just parents who are needing to support these kids. My question is, how can we change the system so that we offer treatment to the kids once they get into trouble? Professor Rapping.
So I want to jump in. I also really want to hear Dr. Gway's position because I think the work you all do with kids is really provides a valuable, expensive coach perspective. But Coach D, I recruit public defenders from all over the country. Our work is to bring them to systems that are most dysfunctional, right? All across. It started across the South. Increasingly, it's across the country. Man, I would recruit, the first thing I look for when I recruit public defenders is the spirit that Coach D is reflecting in the way he's talking, because what we understand is being a lawyer is not, it has become a cog in a process that doesn't see the humanity of human beings. And if we're going to change that, We've got to bring lawyers in who have that historical perspective. We have to bring lawyers in who understand the ways that racism and redlining and all of the remnants of slavery and Jim Crow continue to make it more likely that children from certain communities won't have opportunities, will end up running afoul of the rules that society set, and will end up in the criminal legal system. And so there is a culture, and that culture shapes the best of us. I have seen, I want to tell a story about a public defender from Tennessee. I saw a tape. He had been doing this work 30 years. He was elected by the other public defenders to be the spokesperson for the public defenders. He was at a budget hearing. He was asked, do you have enough resources? He said, let me tell you something. He said, I've got a 5-county district. I have 5 courthouses. I have 5 lawyers and 1 investigator. He said, last year we closed 4,000 cases, right? That's 800 cases per lawyer. He went on to say, so we're blessed. We're doing just fine. My lawyers are efficient. They're time savers. Those were adjectives he used with pride. And what I always say when I talk to public defenders is, I don't believe that man came out of law school 30 years ago saying, you know what I want to do with my life? I think I want to help process 800 poor people into cages a year. I think I'll become a public defender. He was slowly and subtly shaped over 30 years by a system that has come to accept that that's all the justice that poor people deserve. And that acculturation doesn't just happen to defense lawyers. It happens to judges. It happens to prosecutors. And when we embrace that mindset, when we pile onto a narrative that demonizes and monsterizes even the worst folks, right? I think as a defense lawyer, instead of contributing to the narrative that these are awful people, there are other people who are going to do that. The prosecutor is going to do that. The judge will probably do it. Our job is to understand everything else in that person's life and make sure that those aspects are infused into the system. So if defense lawyers, we are also agreeing that these horrible people who rape and murder are just irredeemable, that person has no one to speak about the other aspects of their life. It's not that they may not have done something terrible, but we have to understand the full context if we're really about getting systems to work for people. So one more thing I'm going to urge you to do. You should read the new Jim Crow, which in a very detailed, by Michelle Alexander, which in a detailed way walks through the history that Coach D talked about. You should watch 13th, the documentary by Ava DuVernay that makes the connection between our history of racial oppression and our criminal justice system. I'm going to give one more plug. In August, when my book comes out, you should read that. I promise. All right. But I want to end by saying this. We as defense lawyer, last thing, I had a conversation yesterday, close friend James Foreman, who's the son of James Foreman Sr., who was a field secretary for SNCC. And James Foreman Jr. wrote a book called Locking Up Our Own. And it's about the role of African-American leaders in mass incarceration. And what James Foreman said in a podcast that I host yesterday, he said, you know what, in this moment, you have Black prosecutors, Black judges, Black defense lawyers standing up saying this is wrong. They might even have Black Lives Matter signs in their yards. Monday morning, they will go back to looking at Black bodies in front of them, and they will go along with the accepted processing. They won't stand up. They won't object. They won't say this is wrong. They won't say stop. They will continue to churn as the machine throws away another generation of Black and brown people. We have to interrupt that. If we do nothing else, that's the main job of everyone in the criminal justice system, in my opinion. Professor
Rapping, thank you so much for that answer. Do I get a signed copy of that in August?
Stop by my office, man. I'll sign.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have to go to trial. I'm not going to trial. Okay, so they bounce from lawyer to lawyer to lawyer, but the rape case still sits there. And then they call up the NAACP and they say, I've been sitting here for 3 years. Sir, you have deliberately obstructed the system from giving you a trial. So what's the answer now? You're arrested for rape. She made the allegation of rape. This is not a mass incarceration drug crime.